Winding through deserts, mountain ranges, steppes, and cities, the Silk Road is not just a historical trade route, it is a symbol of the world's first true globalization. Named after one of its most precious commodities, silk, the route spanned from China to the Mediterranean, forming an intercontinental bridge between East and West. Its story is not simply about goods traded, but about cultures exchanged, ideas transmitted, religions spread, and empires transformed. From its earliest whispers in prehistoric exchange paths to its decline under the shadow of maritime dominance, the Silk Road shaped the ancient and medieval worlds in profound ways. Prehistoric exchange and Proto-Silk Roads. Long before the term Silk Road was ever coined by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen in the 19th century, the web of paths that would become the famous trade route existed in embryonic form. Archaeological evidence suggests that even during the Neolithic era, early humans engaged in localized trade. Items like obsidian, turquoise, and shells found far from their origins attest to a human tendency for movement and exchange. In Central Asia, nomadic tribes played a critical role in these early transactions. These people did not build cities or leave behind many written records, but they were expert horsemen, herders, and traders. As early as the 3rd millennium BCE, the trade of lapis lazuli from the Badakhshan region of Afghanistan to Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley indicates long-distance commercial networks. China, too, was developing along its own trajectory. The emergence of agriculture along the Yellow River, and the rise of early dynasties like the Xia and Shang, laid the groundwork for a centralized state that could engage with far-flung territories. Although these dynasties did not yet extend their power into Central Asia, their influence over local resources, particularly silk and jade, became legendary. Silk production, in particular, was China's most coveted secret. The Chinese monopoly on sericulture, guarded by imperial decree, would eventually become the catalyst for an entire transcontinental economy. The roots of the Silk Road were being laid not only through geography, but also through innovation and monopoly, two defining features of China's early contributions to global trade. Zhang Qian and the Han Dynasty. The formal birth of the Silk Road is often attributed to a single moment in the 2nd century BCE, when the Chinese Emperor Wudi of the Han Dynasty, 141 to 87 BCE, sent an emissary named Zhang Qian to the west. Zhang's mission was political and strategic. He was tasked with forming an alliance with the Yuezhi people against the Xiongnu, fierce nomadic warriors who constantly harassed China's northern borders. Zhang Qian's journey was perilous. Captured by the Xiongnu and held for years, he eventually escaped and completed his mission, returning to China with stories of vast lands, wealthy kingdoms, and powerful horses from Fergana. More importantly, he brought back an understanding of the potential to trade with distant empires. Inspired by Zhang's report, the Han Dynasty began to reach westward. Roads were constructed through the Heshi corridor in Gansu, and protection was extended to merchant caravans. The cities of Dunhuang and Kashgar rose to prominence as major way stations between the Chinese heartland and the great unknown West. This was the beginning of what would eventually be called the Silk Road, a network of trade routes that linked the civilizations of China, Central Asia, India, Persia, Arabia, and Europe. While silk was the flagship commodity, the trade included a myriad of items: jade, gold, glassware, spices, perfumes, and even ideas. Geographical span and route network. Contrary to the simplistic image of a single road stretching from east to west, the Silk Road was in fact a highly complex and fragmented network. It stretched approximately 7,000 kilometers, with multiple branches and tributaries. The main artery ran from the Chinese capital of Chang'an, modern Xi'an, through the Gansu corridor, skirting the Taklamakan Desert via either the northern or southern route. These two main paths rejoined at Kashgar before ascending into the Pamirs, where merchants could continue into Samarkand, Bactria, and eventually reach the Persian Gulf or the Levant. Additional southern routes extended through India and the Hindu Kush, while northern passages connected to the steppes of Central Asia and even Siberia. At its western terminus, the road extended into the Roman and Byzantine empires, connecting with Mediterranean ports like Antioch, Tyre, and Ephesus. Goods would often be transferred from land to sea, especially in times of war or regional instability. These intricate trade lines were shaped by topography. Deserts, rivers, and mountain ranges dictated the flow of traffic, but so too did politics. When an empire rose to power and secured a region, trade flourished. When instability or war broke out, the routes shifted or were abandoned entirely. Participants in the early Silk Road. It is tempting to view the Silk Road as a Chinese initiative, but the truth is far more collaborative and multifaceted. The road involved countless peoples, each contributing uniquely to its dynamism. 1. The Chinese, Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty played a foundational role in shaping the early Silk Road. Their desire for Central Asian horses, jade, and military alliances led them to establish diplomatic and commercial links far beyond their borders. Silk was their greatest export, highly coveted for its softness, sheen, and rarity in the West. The Chinese also exported porcelain, lacquerware, paper, and gunpowder, in later centuries. 2. Central Asian nomads. Often overlooked, nomadic tribes were crucial intermediaries. Groups such as the Sogdians, Scythians, and later the Uyghurs and Turks, dominated the land between China and Persia. They offered not only horses and security but also acted as cultural brokers, transmitting languages, religious practices, and artistic motifs across borders. Their mobility and understanding of the land made them indispensable to both empires and merchants. 3. Persians and Parthians. The Parthian Empire, 247 BCE, 224 CE, served as a vital bridge between the East and the Greco-Roman world. Their strategic position allowed them to levy tolls and taxes on goods passing through their territory, enriching their coffers and maintaining influence. Persian fabrics, spices, and metallurgy were traded eastward, while Chinese goods traveled west. 4. The Greeks and Romans. From the time of Alexander the Great, the Greek-speaking world had a strong interest in the East. Though Rome never established direct diplomatic relations with China, Roman coins and artifacts have been found as far east as Vietnam and Gansu, suggesting that their influence, if not their emissaries, reached deep into Asia. Roman interest in silk became almost obsessive. Roman historians like Pliny the Elder lamented the extravagant spending of citizens on silk garments that were semi-transparent and outrageously expensive. 5. Indian kingdoms. India served as both a transit point and a producer of goods. Cotton textiles, spices, dyes, and Buddhist teachings flowed through its cities and into the Silk Road arteries. The Kushan Empire, 30 to 375 CE, which controlled northern India and parts of Central Asia, was particularly influential. They promoted Buddhism and built infrastructure that linked Chinese pilgrims to the sacred sites of the Indian subcontinent. 6. Arabs and later Islamic caliphates. While their involvement came more fully into play after the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Arab merchants and sailors contributed significantly to the maritime branches of the Silk Road. They established prosperous cities like Basra, Baghdad, and later Cairo and Damascus, where goods from Asia would be received and redistributed to Africa and Europe. 7. Traders and pilgrims. In addition to states and empires, the Silk Road was populated by individual travelers. Traders, monks, pilgrims, adventurers, and mercenaries made the journey, some only a few hundred miles, others all the way from China to the Mediterranean. Their stories, preserved in travelogues, poems, and diaries, provide a human face to the grandeur of the Silk Road. Famous figures like the Chinese monk Xuanzang and, later, the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, would become legendary for their transcontinental adventures. The Silk Road as a conduit of culture. While the Silk Road is often romanticized for its exotic trade in silk, spices, and jewels, its most profound legacy may lie in the exchange of ideas, beliefs, technologies, and artistic motifs. Civilizations once separated by vast expanses of wilderness were drawn together, fostering a shared cosmopolitanism across Eurasia. The caravans carried more than material goods, they bore intangible treasures, languages, philosophies, musical instruments, and religions. At its heart, the Silk Road was a cultural engine, converting isolation into integration. It acted as a living organism, growing, shifting, and adapting in response to political, environmental, and spiritual changes. The spread of religion. Perhaps no force transformed the Silk Road more deeply than religion. Along this dynamic highway, multiple faiths, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and later even Nestorianism and Manichaeism, traveled from their homelands and established spiritual enclaves thousands of miles away. 1. Buddhism, from India to China. One of the earliest and most influential religious transmissions along the Silk Road was that of Buddhism. Born in the Indian subcontinent around the 6th century BCE, Buddhism migrated into Central Asia via merchants and missionaries. The Kushan Empire played a central role in this transformation, using its strategic position in the 1st to 3rd centuries CE to promote Buddhist philosophy throughout its dominion. From there, Buddhist monks ventured further east. By the 1st century CE, Buddhist texts and iconography began entering China. Over centuries, Chinese pilgrims such as Faxian, Fa Xin, and Xuanzang embarked on perilous journeys to India in search of authentic scriptures and relics. Their writings provide detailed records of the routes, customs, and conditions of Silk Road travel. Monasteries became rest stops and sanctuaries along the route, offering food, shelter, and spiritual counsel. The caves of Dunhuang in northwestern China, filled with Buddhist murals and manuscripts, stand as one of the most breathtaking testaments to the faith's journey along the Silk Road. 2. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Judaism. Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia, was also carried eastward by Sogdian merchants and Parthian administrators. Though it never established a major presence in China, archaeological remains in Central Asia show fire temples and inscriptions invoking Zoroastrian deities. Christianity, particularly in its Nestorian form, found fertile ground along the Silk Road during the Sasanian Empire and beyond. In 635 CE, Nestorian missionaries arrived at the Chinese court of the Tang dynasty and were permitted to preach. Their presence is immortalized in the Nestorian stele of Xi'an, which records Christian teachings in both Syriac and Chinese. Jewish communities, though small, also existed along the Silk Road. Archaeological evidence suggests Jewish traders lived in parts of Persia, India, and even China, integrating into local societies while maintaining religious identities. 3. Islam, unifier and divider. Following the Prophet Muhammad's revelations in the 7th century CE, Islam rapidly expanded from the Arabian Peninsula across the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. The Islamic caliphates, particularly the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties, transformed the Silk Road. Baghdad, founded in 762 CE by the Abbasids, became a global center of scholarship and commerce. Islamic scholars translated ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, preserving and disseminating scientific knowledge across the Islamic world and into Europe. Yet Islam was more than a scholarly conduit, it became a commercial and spiritual unifier. Arabic became a lingua franca among traders, while the shared practice of Islam fostered trust and interconnectivity. Caravanserais throughout the Islamic world provided not only rest but also legal and religious guidance, cementing Islam's role as both a spiritual and practical presence along the route. Artistic and intellectual exchange. The Silk Road enabled a fusion of aesthetics and ideas that altered the artistic landscape of every region it touched. Chinese art adopted Greco-Roman naturalism through Central Asian intermediaries, Persian miniatures absorbed Chinese motifs like dragons and cloud patterns, Indian sculpture adopted Hellenistic realism brought by Alexander the Great's conquests. In ceramics, textiles, glassware, and jewelry, artisans blended local traditions with foreign styles. The production of silk itself evolved, as other civilizations, Persia, Byzantium, and later Islamic states, learned the art of sericulture and adapted it to their own aesthetic preferences. On a more intellectual level, technologies such as papermaking, invented in China, spread westward. Captured Chinese papermakers brought the craft to Samarkand after the Battle of Talas in 751 CE. From there, paper technology reached the Islamic world and eventually Europe, revolutionizing record-keeping, literature, and education. Political turmoil and shifting empires. For all its grandeur, the Silk Road was also a landscape of imperial ambition, conquest, and collapse. Power was essential to the route's prosperity. When empires secured the roads, trade flourished. When empires fell or war erupted, the road splintered or decayed. 1. The fall of the Han and the rise of the Tang. After centuries of expansion, the Han dynasty collapsed in 220 CE, plunging China into the chaos of the Three Kingdoms period. The security that had allowed the Silk Road to function evaporated, and Central Asia fractured into smaller, often hostile kingdoms. Stability returned with the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, whose military campaigns reopened and expanded trade routes. Tang China was cosmopolitan, open to foreign ideas, and culturally fertile. The capital, Chang'an, became a dazzling melting pot of Persians, Turks, Arabs, Indians, and Chinese. Markets brimmed with foreign wares, and foreign embassies were regular fixtures at court. However, the Tang era was not without peril. The Inlushan Rebellion, 755 to 763 CE, devastated the empire, undermining its finances and fracturing internal unity. Control over the Silk Road weakened, and regional warlords and tribal groups began to take over trade routes. 2. The rise of the Islamic caliphates. As Tang China rose, so too did the Islamic caliphates, particularly the Abbasids. Baghdad and Samarkand became jewels of Islamic civilization, drawing goods and knowledge from across the known world. The fusion of Chinese papermaking, Indian numerals, and Greek philosophy created a golden age of Islamic science, philosophy, and literature. The Abbasid Empire, however, also experienced internal dissent and fragmentation. Turkic tribes in Central Asia gradually grew in power, and political control over key segments of the Silk Road shifted from Arabs to Persians and Turks. 3. Byzantine decline and Western challenges. On the western end of the Silk Road, the Byzantine Empire struggled with internal instability and external threats. While the Byzantines had long imported silk from Persia or indirectly through the Silk Road, by the 6th century, they sought to break the Chinese monopoly. According to legend, Byzantine monks smuggled silkworm eggs out of China in hollow staffs, beginning local silk production in the West. This undercut China's monopoly and signaled a shift in the global silk economy. The later centuries also saw the rise of Christian crusader states, the encroachment of Turkic powers such as the Seljuks, and the general destabilization of the Levant and Anatolia, regions vital to Silk Road commerce. 4. The Mongol invasion and Pax Mongolica. One of the most significant chapters in Silk Road history came with the rise of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan in the 13th century. Though often remembered for their brutal conquests, the Mongols ultimately established the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. Under the Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, the Silk Road was reborn. The Mongols enforced order, eliminated banditry, and built roads and postal stations across Asia. Merchants, diplomats, and missionaries could now traverse the route with unprecedented safety. It was during this period that Marco Polo famously traveled from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan in China, documenting his journey in a memoir that would ignite European imaginations for centuries. The Mongol era represents the Silk Road's last great golden age, when the world felt, for a brief moment, astonishingly interconnected. The gradual decline of the overland Silk Road. Despite the Mongol-facilitated Pax Mongolica, which ensured a flourishing of overland trade, the Silk Road's decline was inevitable. Its fall was not the result of a single cataclysm but rather a slow unraveling caused by changing technologies, geopolitical shifts, disease, and new trade routes that redefined the global economy. By the 14th century, the very empires and systems that had sustained the route began to collapse or recede, one after another. What followed was a fragmentation not only of infrastructure and commerce but also of the very cultural connections that had once tied East and West together. The Black Death and the perils of connection. One of the most destructive factors hastening the Silk Road's decline was the Black Death, which ravaged Eurasia from 1346 to 1353. The bubonic plague, carried by fleas on rats, is believed to have originated in Central Asia and spread rapidly along the same trade routes that had once transported silk, spices, and ideas. The Mongol network, so efficient in uniting distant parts of the continent, unwittingly facilitated the virus's deadly reach. From the steppes of Central Asia to the Italian city-states, the plague annihilated millions. Europe alone may have lost 1/3 to 1/2 of its population. Trade slowed dramatically. Merchants feared for their lives. Caravan routes became ghost trails. Many towns and way stations along the Silk Road fell into disuse, and entire communities vanished. Confidence in overland travel dwindled, and a centuries-old commercial lifeline began to snap. The rise of maritime trade. By the late 15th century, the most decisive blow to the overland Silk Road was delivered not by war or plague but by the ocean. The age of exploration, initiated by Portugal and Spain, ushered in new sea routes to Asia, Africa, and the Americas that ultimately bypassed the overland corridors entirely. The Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama's voyage to India in 1498, via the Cape of Good Hope, was a turning point. No longer constrained by land empires or hostile borders, European traders now had direct access to Asian markets. Maritime trade was faster, less expensive, and more efficient than hauling goods across thousands of miles of desert, steppe, and mountain. European colonial powers, including the Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, and British, established naval dominance and set up trade posts and colonies across Asia. These ports became new centers of global commerce, eclipsing the Silk Road towns of Central Asia. The overland Silk Road, once the artery of transcontinental exchange, receded into the background, surviving only as a network of regional trails and memories of a golden past. The fragmentation of the great empires. With the fall of the Yuan dynasty in China and the disintegration of the Mongol Empire, the political unity that had kept the Silk Road safe and prosperous was lost. The rise of the Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, brought a new inward-looking policy to China. While the Ming conducted impressive maritime voyages under Admiral Zheng He, they also imposed strict controls on trade and sought to defend against northern threats by rebuilding and reinforcing the Great Wall. In the West, the Ottoman Empire rose to power and, after capturing Constantinople in 1453, effectively blocked many traditional land routes from Europe to Asia. While they controlled important segments of the old Silk Road, their political priorities and military ambitions differed from their predecessors, and they imposed tariffs and tolls that discouraged overland trade. In Central Asia, the once powerful Timurid Empire and successor Khanates began to crumble. Regional instability, corruption, and warfare further weakened the infrastructure and trust that overland trade required. By the 17th century, the Silk Road as a dominant trade route was largely dead. What remained were local trade networks, dusty ruins of forgotten caravanserais, and folk tales of merchants and monks who once journeyed across continents. The legacy of the Silk Road. While the physical Silk Road may have faded, its legacy is deeply embedded in the cultural, religious, and political landscapes of Eurasia. It forever changed the civilizations it touched, setting in motion historical forces that continue to reverberate today. 1. Cultural syncretism. Nowhere is the Silk Road's legacy more vivid than in the cultural hybrids it left behind. Along its path, languages, foods, music, and clothing styles intermixed in ways that defy clean categorizations. In cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, Persian architecture blends with Chinese motifs. In western China, Uyghur communities reflect a unique mix of Turkic, Persian, and Chinese influences. Buddhist monasteries. Regions of Central Asia once considered peripheries of the Indian subcontinent, while Christian relics lie buried beneath Chinese soil. Even modern cuisine reflects this heritage, Noodles in Italy and dumplings in Central Asia bear resemblances to Chinese culinary traditions, while spices from India and Indonesia transformed European diets. 2. Religious transmission and tolerance. The Silk Road not only moved commodities but also changed souls. The spread of Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Zoroastrianism fundamentally altered the religious topographies of Asia and Europe. The route's unique characteristic was not just religious movement but religious coexistence. In cities like Merv, Dunhuang, and Chang'an, one could find Buddhist temples, Christian churches, Zoroastrian fire temples, and Islamic mosques standing within walking distance of each other, testimony to a time when faiths mingled, debated, and often tolerated one another for the sake of commerce and survival. Today, remnants of these multi-faith communities still exist in monuments, scriptures, and rituals passed down through generations. 3. Globalization's first draft. The Silk Road represents the earliest model of globalization. It linked far-flung civilizations in complex webs of economic interdependence. It introduced not just material wealth, but cross-cultural literacy, an understanding that different ways of life could coexist and even enrich one another. This model, while not perfect, paved the way for modern concepts of international diplomacy, transnational trade, and cultural relativism. The principles that underlie today's global economy, interconnected markets, shared technologies, and cross-border cooperation, can trace their roots to the camel caravans and dusty trails of the ancient Silk Road. 4. Historical memory and identity. In modern times, the Silk Road has become a powerful symbol of unity, heritage, and possibility. Countries like China have embraced this legacy through major initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, a 21st-century infrastructure program aiming to recreate the old trade routes on a modern scale. Museums, academic programs, and international partnerships have blossomed around the world to study, preserve, and revive the Silk Road's heritage. From UNESCO World Heritage Sites to academic collaborations, the Silk Road continues to inspire scholars, artists, and policymakers alike. It serves as a reminder that the world has long been interconnected, not through domination or colonization alone, but through dialogue, curiosity, and the simple, shared desire to exchange. Conclusion. The Silk Road was not a single road, nor a single era, nor even a single culture story. It was, and is, a tapestry of humanity itself, woven across the spine of Eurasia. From its ancient origins and the curiosity of early traders to its climactic disintegration in the face of disease and sea trade, the Silk Road captured both the best and worst of human enterprise. Its formation was an act of ambition. Its operation required trust, resilience, and tolerance. Its turmoil revealed the fragility of even the most grandiose of human projects. And its legacy, indelibly marked upon the world, continues to remind us of the beauty and complexity of global exchange. In an age where globalization is once again being questioned and redefined, the Silk Road stands as both precedent and prophecy, proof that no matter how distant, peoples and cultures will always find a way to reach out, connect, and transform one another.